Success.
Successfully completing a task.
Completing, accomplishing, okay?
Living faithfully and going to heaven.
There you go. That's my last point on this slide.
Getting the kids on the bus.
Being triumphant, victory, accomplishment, achievement. The Oxford Dictionary says the accomplishment of an aim or a purpose, getting a check in the bank. Webster says a degree or measure of succeeding, a favorable or desired outcome. It's a relative term, and it will vary with individuals. Some people might see something as a success, and another person says, no, that wasn't sufficient. You snickers. No, we don't want to talk about it. There's an old Chinese parable. Good news, bad news, who knows? And this Chinese farmer, he gets up one morning and his horse is gone. He can't go out and plow his field because the horse is gone. His neighbor says, oh, that's bad news. And he said, well, good news, bad news, who knows? Well, then the horse shows back up with another horse. And so the neighbor says, wow, such good fortune. He said, well, good news, bad news, who knows? He gives the second horse to his son. His son tries to ride the horse, and the horse throws him and he breaks his leg. And the neighbor says, oh, I'm sorry to hear about your son. He says, well, good news, bad news, who knows? The province, the next week, goes to war, and so they come around, rounding up all the able-bodied young men to go to war for him, and his son didn't go to war because he's got a broken leg. He said, oh, well, how fortunate. Your son didn't have to go to war. Well, good news, bad news, who knows? You know, and so it goes on like that. And I remember there was an old sitcom where these two old men are debating about whether or not, oh, that's bad news. Well, no, that's good news. So anyway, how does the world define success, though? The world has some funny standards. They're concerned about profit margins. That's, what's the bottom line here? How much are we going to make? Just familiar with that term. Did you have a good profit margin this quarter?
Yes.
Well, good. Standardized testing. I was waiting for a reaction out of Sharon. Numbers. People are concerned about how many social media followers they have. And that is, I don't know, something some people aspire to having a bunch of other people who know their business for some reason. The size of a congregation or a youth group. And from what I've read, that's kind of like a pecking order when the ministers get together. Well, how big's your church? How big's your congregation? How big's your youth group? And so they feel that they're more important if they have a bigger number. ACT scores, any scores, sporting events, whatever. A net worth. But how do you measure success? How are we going to determine whether or not a program, a plan was successful?
We used to, I don't know whose idea it was, in the last school that I was principal of. The idea came across my desk one day. Why don't we have a day that we call Dress for Success? And it was interesting to watch the kids come into school on those quarterly days that we did this. This is K to 6, okay? Mm-hmm. And some of those little guys in first grade, they came in with a tie on. They actually had a suit jacket. One kid did. And you could see the little girls. They actually had a dress on. They were just everybody. I asked the teachers at one meeting, and I said, "What do you all think?" One spoke up. She said, "I don't know what everybody else is finding, but at the end of the day, on those days that we dress for success, the kids had really better, successful days when they dressed for it." Now again, I don't know. I just had to take their word for it. Was it an A? Was it a B? It's all subjective. But they, I thought it was interesting, even looking down at an elementary school and knowing you don't see much dressing for success.
Yeah.
However we determine that and however we define it, it's just, how do you measure success? Maybe it's that spelling test the kid took on the Dress for Success day. Who knows?
Okay, you reminded me of a quick story. One night we're sitting eating dinner, and the classes were just bursting at the seams. The classroom was overcrowded, so after school had started, they decided to add another teacher, and they're going to split the classes up and send kids over. Of course, the teachers kind of pre-picked, I think, and maybe sent a lot of the bad kids over to the new teacher. But anyway, this one little girl that got sent over there, a sweet little girl, and her mom was just livid that her daughter was sent to this new teacher all of a sudden, and how this was poor planning and all that. She ends up pulling her daughter out to homeschool her. Well, so a week or so goes by, and Kyler said, "Do you remember this little girl?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "She dressed like every day was picture day." And I thought, what a great expression. So I thought, I can't wait to tell her mom. So I called her mom and told her that. I said, "I got something for you to write in your baby book." So I told her what Kyler said, and she goes, "Well, I want you to know she picks her clothes out herself, and she dresses herself. And that's all her." She said, "That is, because the mom is nothing like that." She doesn't dress like picture day every day. But anyway, so how do we measure success? How are we going to measure it? We got to have some sort of goals, something in mind. So, but the world, I've already mentioned, they have a funny way of measuring for success. And when we try to compare, use the world's tape measure on spiritual things, that doesn't work out too well. Thanksgiving Day. Did y'all watch football? And after the game is over and they've got that turkey with, 6 legs, so all the players can grab it and start eating it. And so they're all, they're hesitant because I don't think they wore their grills during the game. I think they probably put them in as soon as the game was over so they could be on camera with their gold teeth or silver teeth or diamond-studded teeth, whatever. So it's jewelry for your teeth is what grills are. And so all these guys had put their grills in, and they're sitting there just looking at the turkey. They're starving to death. They want to eat that turkey, but they can't eat because they got their grills in their mouth. And this one player, he just went up and he goes, "I'm not shy." And he starts eating the turkey leg. And he goes, he said, "I don't have grills." And they're all saying, "Yeah, we got grills in. We can't eat." And so the guy said, he said, "I guess I ought to get some grills." The guy that was eating the turkey leg, he said, "I guess I ought to get me some grills." He said, "I don't think my dentist back in Missouri even knows what a grills is." So anyway, health benefits of grills. It causes tooth decay, gum disease, bad breath. I thought, if that is the side effect of having these things in your mouth, why would you want to wear them? Because the other people that makes millions and millions of dollars, they all have them, so we got to be like them, and we got to keep up with the Joneses. We ask kids, what is success? We already gave the answer. Living faithfully and going to heaven. God looks at the heart. He doesn't use earthly, physical means to measure. He looks at the heart of men. 1 Samuel 16:7, Samuel is, of course, looking for the new king to anoint. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Don't be impressed with his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. God does not view things the way men do. People look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." God doesn't measure your success by what you drive or how big your bank account is. That's not what God looks at. He's looking at your heart, your intentions. 1 Kings 8:38 and 39. When all your people Israel pray and ask for help, as they acknowledge their pain and spread out their hands toward this temple, then listen from your heavenly dwelling place, forgive their sin, and act favorably toward each one based on your evaluation of his motives. Indeed, you are the only one who can correctly evaluate the motives of all people, because God is looking at the heart. More of the God knows the heart. 1 Chronicles 28 and 9. And you, Solomon, my son, know the God of your father and serve him with a whole heart and with a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands every plan and thought. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. Oops. Sorry, I was trying to brighten this so I could read the screen. And I was hitting the wrong button. Proverbs 16:2. All the ways of man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. Acts 1:24, when they're selecting a new apostle to replace Judas. And they prayed and said, "You, Lord, who know the hearts of all, show which one of these two you have chosen." And in Acts 15:8, and God, who knows the heart, has testified to them by giving them the Holy Spirit just as he did us. Well, let's talk about Moses. Kirk Brothers in the book, he was talking about Moses. He's examining people and whether or not they were determined successful. So what is Moses remembered for?
Tablets.
The tablets?
Or Exodus.
The lawgiver. And the Exodus. He was God's leader. He was to bring the people out of Egypt to the promised land. And can you imagine being appointed a task like that? How many people are coming out of Egypt? Any guesses?
A million.
A million? So he's going to lead this multitude to the promised land. There are estimates that say there was 2.4 million people that left Egypt. 600,000 men was the original estimate from Exodus 12:37. Just the men, 600,000, not counting the women and children. That's a lot of people. How are you going to feed that many people? That's going to be a long line at McDonald's. How many of that 2.4 million actually were permitted to enter the Holy Land? 2. Yeah, not counting the spies. Joshua and Caleb are the only 2 that made it to the Promised Land. So 2.4 million and only 2 of them, that's like winning the lottery or something, huh? So by the numbers, is Moses successful if only 2 people got to enter the Promised Land? Again, it's that measuring stick that we're using. Yeah, we're trying to use earthly terms to define what was successful. What about the church? Do churches have targets, goals? Yes. We recently had a Mission Sunday, a goal for raising funds. We have Bible class drives, try to get everybody present. Sunday evening services. But again, we're trying to use a physical measuring stick to determine if a church is successful. And it's really kind of sad. I know of a lot of churches that because they have 30% of the membership or less that come on Sunday night, that they quit having Sunday evening services. Do you know how Sunday evening services started? I've heard that it was due to shift work. People could, when they got off work, they had to work Sunday morning, maybe in the mines or something. So when they got off work, then they could go to church in the evening. That's why they had evening services. Not scriptural. And we've mentioned before in classes, midweek services. Most of America, most of the churches of Christ anyway, have it on Wednesday night. But in other countries, it's on Tuesday night, Thursday night. We thought that was so strange. And another strange thing that we saw when we were in Trinidad, they still had 2 services on Sundays, and they would serve communion to everyone Sunday morning and Sunday night. It was still the first day of the week. And when they, the first time they gave it to us, the group from our campaign group, we all just looked at each other. Are we overeating during the assembly? It's kind of unusual going to church in another country and experiencing some of their traditions. At some churches, preachers are hired or fired because of the numbers, because of the attendance. Attendance has fallen off, so we're going to have to fire you. We're going to have to hire somebody else. Try to build this up. Age discrimination. You're too young, too inexperienced. We don't want you. We want somebody that's a little older, somebody that, we don't want somebody that's going to cut their teeth on our congregation. We want somebody that knows what they're doing when they come in.
On your standing slide, I was actually expecting to see time up there, which that's another one you could listen to.
Yeah. Others say, you're too old. We need a younger face that's going to draw the younger crowd. They think the younger person might be more interesting. And you used to see, they want on job applications in the Chronicle. I went back and looked through it to see if they had any, they always have ads in there, preacher needed. And they used to say they prefer age 30 to 50. Somebody over 30 and younger than 50, because they didn't want a young person, they didn't want an old person. I looked through this recent Chronicle, and the only thing that referenced age was for a youth minister. They wanted a young, what's the word, mature male or something like that. It was almost a little bit ironic. But they were looking for a young male to fill that position. I wonder if today, if Moses or Noah or one of the prophets applied at a church, or even Jesus came and applied at a church for a job, if they would even be considered. Well, let's see your resume. What kind of success have you had? You're leading 2.4 million people from Egypt to Israel, and only 2 made it.
Throw David into the mix.
Yeah. The problem is our definition of success. What we determined was successful. Jesus is the leader. I look at that clock and I'm going, I'll put my clock out here. My watch is too hard to get to. Jesus is the leader. So the topics that we've talked about, the things that Jesus did, he was centered, he was focused, he knew where he was going. He was capable of the job. He was connected. He talked to God frequently. He was compassionate, common, clear thinking. He coached the apostles. He focused on getting them prepared to be the next leaders. And last week we talked about his character. John chapter 6. I'm not going to read the whole chapter because it's quite long. John chapter 6, verse 2, he had a large crowd following him. I mean, initially reading that, you would say, oh, yeah, he had great success. He had this big crowd of followers. A large crowd was following him because they were observing the miraculous signs he was performing on the sick. And of course, he goes up on the mountain to get away and to be by himself. Jumping down to verse 10, actually a little bit before that. Verse 5. I put verse 10, but verse 5 is when Jesus looked up and he saw a large crowd was coming to him, and he said to Philip, "Where can we buy bread so that these people may eat?" Now Jesus said this to test him, for he knew what he was going to do. Philip replied, 200 silver coins worth of bread would not be enough for them each to have, each one to get a little. One of Jesus' disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "Here's a boy who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good are these for so many people?" And Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." And of course, we all know he divides it, and how many leftovers did they gather up? 12 baskets of leftovers after everybody had eaten their fill, and they had more than the people could consume. I thought verse 12 was kind of interesting. When they were all satisfied, Jesus said to his disciples, "Gather up the broken pieces that are left over, so nothing is wasted." The feeding of 5,000 is the only miracle that's recorded in all 4 Gospels. So then Jesus goes on to teach them more, and he says, "I'm the bread of life," in verses 22 through 59. And he says some things that are hard for them to understand, that are somewhat offensive for them. He says they're going to have to eat his flesh and drink his blood. And they weren't sure exactly what is he talking about. Verse 66. After this, many of his disciples quit following him and did not accompany him any longer. 67. So Jesus said to the 12, "You don't want to go away too, do you?" I'm jumping ahead of myself. So he had this huge crowd that's following him, and actually he was at Capernaum, and they came across the lake, and they kind of ran around to meet him. He saw the crowd coming. What are we going to feed this group? And so he feeds the 5,000, and they pick up 12 baskets of leftovers. And after this, many disciples turned and no longer walked with him. They quit following him. And so Jesus now addresses the apostles. Do you want to go away as well? And the Net Bible says, "You don't want to go away too, do you?" In the Greek, there's actually a negative. The way the question is written, it's implied that there's going to be a negative answer to this. Since so many of the disciples had left him, he's questioning the commitment of the apostles. Do you want to go away too? Where would we go? You have the words of life. And then he dies on Calvary alone. The apostles had abandoned him. So, using the world standards, get that world measuring stick out. That multitude that followed him, the 12, where else would we go? You have the words of life. They've abandoned him, and he dies alone. So, by the world standards, they wouldn't consider him a successful leader.
Unless he's an artist.
An artist.
They're always worth more when they die, right?
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Their art goes up in value. So what happened? The master teacher is rejected. All these people have left. Why did they leave? Well, they were offended by his teaching. He's crucified. But you have to remember, he's working with weak, frail, self-centered humans. When it said that multitude that was following him, that came to see him, they were drawn by the miracles. And actually, Jesus said, you just came because of the food. That's the Hickson paraphrase. 5 things. The people had improper motives. They were following Jesus to see what they could get from Jesus. They had improper focus. Physical, not spiritual. They're looking for a king that's going to conquer the Romans and make Israel great again. Improper notions of the Messiah. The idea that he's going to be a physical king, not have a spiritual kingdom. The teaching was difficult to accept. John 6:60. Some refused to believe and to change. Jesus had a different definition of success. What's his name? Kirk Brothers said that you have to clarify the win. You have to communicate with your organization what you expect. What kind of outcome are we looking for? What kind of goals are we going to work on? What is really important here? And here's a quote from, this is from Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Practices of, no, not Stephen Covey, 7 Practices of Effective Ministry. Oh, there's 3 different guys that wrote that. I forgot their names. Too many church leaders have bought into the myth that to clarify the win means establishing attendance goals and raising lots of money. These can certainly be indicators about the health of your organization, but strong numbers in these areas do not necessarily mean you are winning. Jesus did not define success by the numbers. Looking back at John chapter 6, he wasn't concerned about keeping this multitude and taking this multitude with him to Jerusalem. A lot of them got offended and left. And he asked the apostles, do you want to leave too? And verse 26, chapter 6, 26, is where he said that you just came for the food. Talking about the crowd that had left, that eventually left. Jesus replied, I tell you the solemn truth, you are looking for me, not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate all the loaves of bread you wanted. So you're just looking for food. Some other hard teachings that Jesus taught that turned people away. The rich young ruler in Mark 10, 17 and following. What more do I lack? I've done all these. I've kept the commandments since I was little. And Jesus knew the one thorn in his flesh was the fact that he was rich. So he told him, go sell all that you have, give it to the poor, then come follow me. That's a hard pill to swallow. And I talked to Tim after we moved. I said, I said, every time he talks about the rich young ruler or talks about building bigger barns, I said, I feel guilty. He said, don't feel guilty. He tried to ease my conscience, but I still feel guilty. Jesus is talking to a scribe who wants to follow him. And he tells this scribe, the Son of Man doesn't even have a place to lay his head. You're not going to be able to go, if you're following me, you're not going to have a memory foam pillow to lay your head on. You're not going to have that goose down bed or whatever he had that he would rest on. Matthew 10, he had several statements about whoever loves his father and mother more than me, whoever loves his son and daughter more than me is not worthy. Verse 38, whoever does not take up his cross and follow me. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Wait, you got to die to follow you? Even to the point of death. Jesus said, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. And what were his last words on the cross? It is finished. It is finished. Now I'm going to get to Stephen Covey. His second point of his 7 habits of highly effective people, highly effective leaders. I think it is. This is number 2. Begin with the end in mind. Jesus had the end in mind the whole time, all through his life. He knew that his life was leading him to Jerusalem, to a cross. He had a clear understanding of his destination. And Kirk Brothers commented about make sure your ladder is leaning on the right wall. Every time I think of a ladder, and I'm sure I've told you guys this story, forgive me. A storm went through Winfield, Kansas, and it was heavily damaged. And so the Edmond Church of Christ put together a group to go up there to help with the cleanup. And so Rhonda and I went with them. And so while we're up there, I was with Dale Bettis and can't remember the other guy's name. Anyway, 3 men. We're out cleaning up trees. And this one house that we were sent to, I tried to find the picture and I couldn't find it. They had this huge elm tree in their backyard. The trunk was so big, the 3 of us couldn't reach around this tree because it was that big. And a lot of the limbs, several of the limbs, were hanging over this garage, a 3-car garage. It looks kind of like a lean-to, but they had cars stored in there. Some of the limbs have already fallen down. They couldn't get the cars out of the garage. They said, could you bring that tree down for us and try not to damage the garage? Oh, okay. So we're going to have to talk about this. We let them know that this big trunk, when we leave, that big trunk is still going to be there because we don't have anything to cut that with. So anyway, Dale and I, we put this 16-foot extension ladder as high as it would go, and it just barely reached the limb up there that was up over the garage. And so Dale's going to go up, and out beyond the garage, he's going to cut that off. There's a lot of weight hanging out there. And so he's cutting the limb, and I saw it, when it cracked a little bit, the limb went up. It relieved some of that weight on the limb. And the ladder was like, I went, oh, he's going to fall. And I went running in. Sorry. So I ran in, and I braced myself against the ladder, and I'm holding it with all my might. And he went ahead and finished cutting. He didn't realize what was happening. And when the limb cut, and it's falling off, and he saw that go up, and his ladder is just sticking up in the air. And he went, he couldn't believe it. He came down as fast as he could. And so he's like, I owe you my life. It's like, it's okay. I said, I was just just saw it was going to happen, and I just came to help. So, but Ron and I have been out to eat a couple of times, and Dale happened to be at the same restaurant, and so then they would come by and say, "Your meal's been paid for." So, anyway, make sure your ladder's leaning on the right wall. With the end in mind, make sure that keeps you heading in the right direction. If you've got your eye on the target, your eyes fixed on Jesus, that's going to keep you going on the right path. Jesus had a clear understanding of his mission, of what he came to do. He endured setbacks. People that decided not to follow anymore. They've heard all they want to hear. His goals were not measured in human terms. Moses, Noah, Jeremiah, those prophets that preached and no one ever responded to them. They weren't failures. We just are trying to measure their job with human standards rather than seeing what was on their heart as God sees them. Knowing the end is near. So Jesus is at Jerusalem. He hasn't entered yet. But when he enters Jerusalem, there's this triumphal entry in Jerusalem. People are celebrating. Hosanna. They're singing. They're laying palm branches down for him to come into the... They're treating him like royalty. They've rolled out the red carpet. The king is here. They're excited. But by the end of the week, they're shouting, "Crucify him." If you lead people, they're eventually going to let you down. 5 things to remember. Humans will mess up. Focus on your job, watering and planting, whatever your job is. And God gives the increase. God gets the glory. When I was in college, we went to Montreal for a month. And we'd go to the public library and do puppet shows and things just to get kids, they couldn't really get the kids to come to a VBS, come to the church for that. But if we did it at the library, which was just down the street from the church, we would have crowds. The parents would let the kids go to the library to see a puppet show. And so that's where we would kind of introduce them to the church. And we had fun for a month. We had a good time. A couple of the girls was staying with this lady who, she was married to a man that wasn't a Christian. And he would come to service with her occasionally, but he had this image of Christians being stoic and never having fun. But after watching us having fun for a month, after we get back to OC, we got a letter that he got baptized. So we were helping to water. Michael Mazzalongo was the associate minister up there, and of course he did a lot of the planning. We did some watering. Do not buy into the world's definition of success. The world's definition of success can be a stumbling block for us. Don't live for human praise. Don't look to be recognized. Don't focus on the short-term results, because you never know what's going to happen, when you leave. Conclusion? This is a writer from the Chicago Sun-Times. A failure is not someone who tried and failed. It's someone who has given up trying and resigned himself to failure. It's not a condition, but an attitude. Can you imagine if Thomas Edison said, Well, I tried to make a light. It didn't work. I quit. He didn't do that. He didn't have a failure attitude. He continued to work on it and refine it until he eventually found a solution. Even Jesus was not able to convert everyone. While he was alive, there were people that walked away from him while he was here. Hard to believe. Expect setbacks and discouragements. Find a place to lead, to work, and remain faithful. You know the difference between astronomers and astronauts? What's an astronomer?
Reads the stars,
Yeah. Stays here on Earth. He's got a big telescope. He's looking, studying stars. What do astronauts do? Go to them. Yeah. So we need to stop being astronomers sitting in the safety of our pews and be astronauts and go out and do the work. Wayne, would you lead us in word?